The studio audience buzzed with anticipation as the crew made final preparations for another explosive episode of Real Time with Bill Maher. The air crackled with tension, everyone aware of the night's high-profile guest, none other than Hollywood legend and outspoken activist, Denzel Washington. As the theme music swelled and the lights blazed to life, Bill Maher strutted onto the stage, basking in the applause and cheers. He grinned his signature smirk, ready to unleash his trademark wit and scathing commentary. "Welcome to Real Time," he bellowed, the audience hanging on his every word. "We've got a hell of a show for you tonight, folks. My guest is a man who needs no introduction, a true icon of the silver screen. Please welcome Denzel Washington." The crowd erupted as Denzel walked out, his presence commanding the room. He greeted Bill with a firm handshake, his expression serious, his eyes intense. There was no trace of the usual Hollywood charm or manufactured affability. Denzel was here for real talk, and everyone knew it. As the applause died down and the two men took their seats, Bill leaned forward, ready to dive in. "Denzel," he began, "let's cut right to the chase. You've been making headlines lately, and not just for your films. You've been very vocal about the state of race relations in America, about the challenges facing the Black community. Some would say you've been stirring the pot." Denzel met Bill's gaze unflinchingly. "Stirring the pot?" he repeated, his voice low and measured. "Bill, I'm not here to make people comfortable. I'm here to speak truth. And the truth is, our country is in crisis. We're facing issues of systemic racism, of police brutality, of economic inequity that have been boiling under the surface for generations. It's time we had an honest conversation about it." Bill nodded, but there was a glint of challenge in his eye. "An honest conversation, okay. But some would argue, Denzel, that the rhetoric coming from certain quarters, the talk of defunding the police, of dismantling the system, is only making things worse. That it's divisive, even dangerous." Denzel's jaw tightened. "Dangerous," he said, his voice rising slightly. "You know what's dangerous, Bill? Ignoring the problem. Pretending that a few bad apples are the issue when the entire orchard is rotten. The system is broken, Bill. It's been broken for a long time. And it's going to take more than a few incremental reforms to fix it." The audience murmured, the tension in the room rising. Bill pressed on, undeterred. "But Denzel," he said, "you're a successful man. You've risen to the top of your profession, achieved incredible things. Doesn't your story show that the system works, that anyone can make it if they try hard enough?" Denzel leaned back in his chair, a mirthless chuckle escaping his lips. "Bill," he said, "I'm going to let you in on a little secret. My success, it's the exception, not the rule. For every Denzel Washington, there are a million young Black men who never get a shot, who are born into a system that's stacked against them from day one." He leaned forward, his gaze boring into Bill's. "You think it was easy for me, Bill? You think I didn't face racism, discrimination every step of the way? I got lucky, Bill. I had people who believed in me, who opened doors. But for every door that opened for me, 100 more slammed shut in the face of someone just as talented, just as deserving." Bill shifted in his seat, a flicker of discomfort crossing his features. "Okay," he said, "but what's the solution, Denzel? How do we fix a problem that's so deep-rooted, so intractable?" Denzel's eyes flashed. "We start by acknowledging it," he said, his voice rising with passion. "We start by having the courage to look the ugly truth in the face and call it what it is. Racism, oppression, injustice." He stood up, his presence filling the room. "And then we get to work. We dismantle the structures that perpetuate inequality. We invest in education, in job training, in mental health services. We hold our leaders accountable. We demand change at every level." Bill stood to meet him, not backing down. "But Denzel," he said, "some would say that's a radical agenda. That it's too much, too fast. That we need to be realistic, to work within the system." Denzel let out a sharp bark of laughter. Realistic? He said, his voice dripping with contempt. Was it realistic to think we could put a man on the moon? Was it realistic to think we could end segregation, pass the Civil Rights Act? Change doesn't come from being realistic, Bill. It comes from being bold, from being uncompromising in the face of injustice. He took a step closer to Bill, his finger jabbing the air for emphasis. Let me ask you something, Bill. When you look at the state of our country, at the pain and the suffering and the inequality, do you feel a sense of urgency? Do you feel a fire in your belly to make things right? Bill blinked, momentarily taken aback. Of course I do, Denzel. I've spoken out on these issues for years. But nothing, Denzel interrupted, his voice like a whip crack. There is no but. You either stand for justice, or you stand in the way of it. You either use your platform, your privilege, to lift up the voices of the oppressed, or you're part of the problem. The audience was dead silent now, the air electric with tension. Bill tried to rally, to find his footing. Now hold on, Denzel, he said, a note of defensiveness creeping into his voice. I've been an ally. I've used my show to highlight these issues, to give a platform to marginalized voices. Denzel shook his head, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Bill, he said softly, being an ally isn't about giving scraps from your table. It's about giving up your seat at the head of it. It's about recognizing that your success, your platform, comes at a cost. That it's built on the backs of those who've been denied their seat for far too long. He leaned in close, his eyes locked on Bill's. So let me ask you again, Bill. Are you ready to stand for real change? Are you ready to put it all on the line, to risk your comfort, your status, your reputation, for the sake of justice? Bill swallowed hard, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Every eye was on him, waiting for his response. But before he could speak, Denzel held up a hand. Actually, he said, his voice low and deliberate, don't answer that. Because I've heard your answer before, Bill. I've heard it from 1,000 men who look like you, who talk like you. Men who say they want change, but who aren't willing to sacrifice for it. Men who nod and smile and talk a good game, but who go right back to business as usual the moment the cameras stop rolling. He leaned back, his eyes never leaving Bill's. So here's what I'm going to do, Bill. I'm going to say what needs to be said, and you're going to listen, really listen. And if at the end of it, you're still more concerned with being comfortable than being righteous, then we'll know exactly where you stand. The audience held its breath as Denzel began to speak, his words pouring out in a torrent of raw, unfiltered truth. He spoke of the Black experience in America, of the daily indignities and the systemic oppression. He spoke of the toll of racism on the psyche, on the soul. He spoke of the need for radical, sweeping change, for a reckoning with the sins of the past and the injustices of the present. And as he spoke, something extraordinary happened. The audience, so used to the glib cynicism and ironic detachment of Maher's usual fare, found themselves leaning in, hanging on Denzel's every word. They felt the weight of his message, the urgency of his call to action. They saw, perhaps for the first time, the human cost of the issues they so often debated in the abstract. When Denzel finished, the room was silent for a long, heavy moment. Then, slowly, a murmur began to build. It started as a ripple, then grew to a wave, then a roaring tide. The audience was on their feet, applauding, cheering, shouting their agreement and their solidarity. And Bill? He sat stunned, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Shock, defensiveness, maybe even a glimmer of something like shame. He looked at Denzel, at the man who had just laid bare the inadequacy of his own efforts, his own commitment to the cause. Denzel met his gaze, unflinching. Well, Bill, he said quietly, what's it going to be? Are you ready to put your money where your mouth is? To use your influence, your platform, to fight for real, lasting change? Or are you content to sit there and make jokes while the world burns? Bill opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, the master of the quick quip, the cutting retort, was speechless. The moment stretched out, taut and heavy with meaning. And then, finally, Bill spoke. "You're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're right, Denzel. I haven't done enough. I've been content to nibble around the edges, to play it safe. But that ends now." He stood up, facing Denzel directly. "I'm ready," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I'm ready to put it all on the line. To use every ounce of my influence, my privilege, to fight for justice. To amplify the voices of the unheard, to challenge the systems of oppression wherever they exist." Denzel nodded, a smile of genuine respect spreading across his face. "Now that," he said, "is the Bill Maher I came here hoping to find." He extended his hand, and Bill grasped it firmly. In that moment, a pact was sealed, a commitment made. Two men, from vastly different worlds, finding common cause in the fight for a better, more just America. The audience erupted in a standing ovation, the energy in the room reaching a fever pitch. They knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary, something that would reverberate far beyond the walls of that studio. In the days and weeks that followed, the impact of that night on real time became clear. Bill Maher was a changed man, a man on a mission. He used his show as a platform for activists, for organizers, for the voices that had too long been silenced. He challenged his guests, his audience, himself, to confront hard truths, to take bold action. And slowly but surely, the needle began to move. Conversations shifted. Policies changed. A movement, long simmering beneath the surface, began to gather steam. At the center of it all was Denzel Washington, the man who had catalyzed this moment of reckoning. He continued to speak out, to organize, to lead by example. And everywhere he went, he carried with him the memory of that night on real time. The night he had stared down complacency and dared it to blink. For Denzel, it was a reminder of the power of truth, of the necessity of uncomfortable conversations. It was proof that change was possible, that even the most entrenched minds and hearts could be moved by the force of righteous conviction. And as he watched the ripples of that night spread out across the nation, Denzel felt a surge of hope, of determination. The fight was far from over, the road ahead long and steep. But he knew, with a certainty that came from deep within, that victory was inevitable. That justice, long denied, would not be denied forever. So he kept speaking, kept fighting, kept believing. For himself, for his community, for the nation he loved. And with every word, every action, he moved us all closer to the day when the promise of America would be fulfilled. When liberty and justice for all would be not just a pledge, but a reality. That was the dream that drove Denzel Washington. And on that unforgettable night on Real Time, he brought us all one step closer to making it come true. But the journey is far from over. Change this profound, this necessary, takes more than one voice, one night, one show. It takes all of us, each and every one, committing to the hard work of justice. If Denzel's words stirred something in you, if Bill's pledge inspired you to action, then it's time to join the fight. Subscribe to our channel, get informed, get involved. Use your voice, your platform, your privilege to lift up the causes that matter. The road ahead won't be easy. There will be setbacks, obstacles, opposition. But with your help, with your determination, there's nothing we can't achieve. So hit that button. Stand with Denzel, with Bill, with all those fighting for a better world. Because the movement for justice needs all of us. And together, we will make America live up to the full measure of its creed. One honest conversation, one act of courage at a time. The fire has been lit. The call has been sounded. Now it's up to us to answer it.